that allows us to, hold on a second, that allows us to quickly create enhanced contents notes using a combination of Google Keep and Notepad++ macros. All right, so this page here is mostly here for people looking through this slide deck after the fact, because it hyperlinks to the different sections of the presentation. But just to give you kind of an overview, we're going to go over a little background on why I'm doing this, and then a section each on the Google Keep part of the process and the Notepad++ part. And then I'll kind of wrap up with some tips and tricks and a little discussion of how the whole project has gone. So who am I and how did I get here? I'm the head of systems and metadata services at Boatwright Memorial Library, which is fancy HR talk to I'm head of cataloging and I do a lot of work with our ILS Alma. Also pictured is my cat, Sanji. I'm a first-time NASIG attendee, but my colleague Anna Creech has talked you all up for years, so I'm very glad to be here with you folks. Not usually a serials cataloger, at least not exclusively, but as the head of a 3-person cataloging team, I've dabbled from time to time until now when it's become a much bigger part of my life. We'll get to that on the next slide. So we have been working on a 2024 periodicals inventory project. In May of this year, our library started a comprehensive inventory, recataloging, and labeling project for our periodicals, which are located deep in the spooky basement annex of our library. So to start with, this is the whole range you can see here in this photograph. Most of these have bibliographic records that are out of date. They're not RDA compliant. The holdings are inaccurate, and there are few, if any, item records for a lot of these. A lot of them are missing large swaths of issues or don't have barcodes attached. So since these don't circulate, back when we were on Voyager, it didn't make sense to label or barcode these. But after we moved to Alma Primo in 2020, it quickly became apparent that Primo was much more dependent on having item records that accurately had the holdings and items set up correctly, both for the catalog use and also for statistical gathering with Alma Analytics. And additionally, having these labeled nicely makes it easier for students to find what they're looking for down there and for student workers to know where to shelf them. So we recruited a number of helpful metadata curious staff members from other departments, and we began work in earnest in June with a few cross-training sessions and a pile of project-specific documentation on our departmental wiki. Things have been going great. As a team, we're getting a little faster each month, and I think we're on track to finish at least the majority of this work before we're booted out of our offices for major construction in May of next year. However, and this is where the problem comes in, our cross-trained staff are only trained to work with what we've been calling single bib periodicals, which is what it sounds like, any set that has only one bibliographic record to fix, a single title, just with a number of volumes. This leaves all of our monographic series in our periodicals area for 2 catalogers to deal with. And when we ran our original Alma Analytics number to gather a count for these, it was somewhere in the vicinity of 12,000 items. And that's very inaccurate and a very low ball number. So our monographic series are some of our larger sets that we have in the collection. Some of them were already in the periodicals area, and some of them we've been pulling over from circulating to make room for more stuff. As I've detailed on the slide here, many of these have a specific topic per volume or a large number of contributors and would benefit from access points for all of those individual things. It's our local cataloging policy that anything that fits those descriptions should include an enhanced contents note. And even though we had so many items to work on, we really didn't want to let that slide. We wanted to still provide that level of access to our users. So after slogging through 20 or so volumes of the Symposia of the Zoological Society of London, I started to think there had to be a better way, some sort of tool that could make this faster but still good. Through some trial and error, I landed on the following. Step 1, I use my phone camera to take photographs of each individual page of the resources table of contents. For step 2, I import those photographs into the Google Keep app on my phone, and I use that to OCR the text. And then step 3, I pull the text from that OCR into Notepad++, which is a separate desktop application, and I use a combination of manual editing and helpful macros to create a final 505. So step 1, I will show you how I use Google Keep to get the text from the page. It's a pretty simple process once you do it once, but I'm going to walk everybody through it. We're not going to do a live demo because that seems like tempting fate on Zoom, but I will provide screenshots and there's even a tiny short video for reference. So we'll go through these by bullet point. The first thing you'll need to do is download Google Keep on your phone if you choose to use your phone. You can also access it through your browser at keep.google.com. As a note, I did provide a copy of these slides to our lovely NASIG organizers, which hopefully will have these links active for you. As another note, I wouldn't personally put anything I wanted to keep private in this app because it's Google and they could scrape your text for anything. But for a situation where you want the text to end as publicly accessible as possible, this works great. So in this app, once you've downloaded it, you would create a new note, which will look like one of these two images. I have a browser and a mobile example here. I do not have an iPhone, so if it displays it differently on iPhone, I apologize. I can't check that. Let me know if I need to add something if I ever do this presentation again. So step 2, you'll want to take a photograph of your table of contents, but page by page. You can do this from the app itself, or you can take a picture that you've already taken and just insert that photo into the app afterwards. It doesn't matter what order you do these things in. Here's a couple tips to get your TOC glamour shots. You want to make sure you center the images as much as possible on the text. This is a picture I took, and I'll be using this example throughout this presentation. But in this case, I might crop out the top. We'll go over this a little bit more later too. But the OCR can pick up ghost images from the other side of the page. I'll show you an example of that in a future slide. And the final step of this is you will use Keep to OCR that text. You click on the photograph and you select the option Grab Image Text. On the desktop option, that's going to be at the bottom of your note. And on the phone app, I had to hit the upper right. I don't have a frame of reference for iPhone. Hopefully it's similar. Keep will take a few moments to think about it before outputting the text into the body of the note. It's hung up on me a couple times historically, but it's really rare. Once that finishes, this is a sample generated text output from Google Keep to the note inside of Google Keep. So you can see how this comes out in practice. So as you can see, it's already saved us a lot of typing, which my wrist is grateful for, but it still needs some work. So this will bring us to the next part of the presentation. Bringing this into Notepad++ for editing and formatting. So for Notepad++, I'll let its website speak for itself. It's a lightweight text editor with a lot of useful features. It's great for everything from detailed programming work to leaving notes for yourself. I use it for work and personal stuff. Authority records I'm working on, grocery lists, my notes for Dungeons and Dragons. It's great for everything. The first part of this process, once the text is in Notepad, is the most manual part of the whole thing. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see me going through this process in a slightly sped up time. Hopefully that's not too distracting. But here I am taking the raw text we got from our Google Keep OCR and stripping out the junk that you don't need, like ellipses, page numbers, and formatting that into what looks like a normal 505 table of contents. You'll note that I am not adding subfield codes or delimiters, just the double dashes to indicate a new chapter or article, and the / to indicate a statement of responsibility. On the slide here, in the first bullet point, I mentioned errors. I'll show you a couple of possibilities that you could see for errors toward the end of the presentation. This particular table of contents OCR'd quite nicely, but sometimes it can do a few funky things you want to watch out for. Lastly, it can be helpful to break up parts of a work. In this case, we have a part 1, a part 2, and a part 3 into different paragraphs in Notepad++ for reasons I'll explain during the next step when we use our macro on it. Oh, hold on. There we go. All right. So on the top left is the macro that I wrote for this, which I have shared in my GitHub repository. Again, there's a link on here that you should be able to click later, and there will be another link on the final slide. This macro will add the delimiters and the subfield codes to the text you created in the previous steps. A couple caveats with this: it cannot figure out the difference between something that needs a subfield G for miscellaneous information versus a title subfield T. That's something that you as a cataloger will need to look out for. And secondly, the macro will not add a subfield to the beginning of the paragraph you're running the macro on, because what it is checking for is those double dashes and the forward slashes to determine where it throws those T's and R's. I've created a second macro for that, which is called first subfield. It's in the same GitHub repository folder, but honestly, I don't use that one because that's where most of the time you're going to end up with that miscellaneous information subfield G. So it's just as easy to add that in manually, but it is available for you if that's something that would be useful for you. Once you do any tweaks you have to do, and I definitely recommend giving it a once over to make sure there are no glaring errors, this text is ready to be pasted into OCLC, saved, and imported into your catalog, as is seen here. And that's basically the whole process. So finally, I'll share a couple final thoughts and share a few things to watch out for if you try this out yourself. The first thing to watch out for is something I mentioned a bit earlier, and that's that depending on the thickness of the paper and the photograph you're able to get, lighting conditions, all of that, Google Keep has a habit of reading the back of your page and inserting gobbledygook. In this case, it added some Cyrillic lettering. This is a particularly messy example. It's at least a very easy fix because you just delete the line of erroneous text. But bear that in mind while you're working with this. Now, the other thing Google Keep unfortunately does sometimes, and this one you need to be a little bit more vigilant about, is that sometimes it will swap the lines. Here's an example where it swapped the line with the author's name with the title of the chapter. And this one was pretty easy to notice, but where this can get tricky is if you have multiple lines of co-authors on a piece and it throws it between another chapter somewhere. I've had that happen. You just kind of have to be vigilant with that. So definitely, as I said, give things a good QR once over when you're in the editing process. I don't want to scare you. These issues aren't constant, and it does behave well most of the time. Just be sure to keep an eye on these things while you work. So now that you've seen this whole process, I just want to briefly restate the impact this has had on our work here at Boatwright Memorial Library. It's really made generating proper tables of contents for these kinds of works a whole lot faster. And while I originally devised this method to deal with this particular large project, I've definitely been using it for other things as well. A couple examples of ways I've used it. The macro can be used on regular non-enhanced 505s that I want to upgrade or fix. Whenever I see one that is formatted like an enhanced table of contents, but just doesn't have those subfields there, I will just copy that out of connection, run this macro on it, stick it back in there, and update the record. It's great. Another thing I've used this for is I've used the Google Keep OCR to capture other information like blurbs on the back of a book or a title page. This can be really handy when a work has a lot of diacritics because Keep is actually pretty good at picking those up. Or a Russian title that I was working with a while back. I don't know a whole lot about Cyrillic, so it was very helpful to pick up that text. it saves me a lot of time on our Spanish language collection, so that's been great too. And just under the wire for 15 minutes, that's it. Thank you for listening from both me and my seasonally appropriate black and orange cats. I have got to pay that cat presentation tax. I hope you found something in this presentation that might be helpful to what you do in your library. I'm happy to answer any questions either now or by email later. I've put the link to the repository here as well as my email. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So, first of all, everyone is loving your Halloween theme, but there are actually, yes, they think it's wonderful, and they're going to be bringing this back to their department. But there's an actual question. Are you aware of anyone trying this process using Microsoft Lens instead of Google to capture image and turn into OCR? And would that allay concerns about sensitive data?
I'm not familiar with that particular tool, so I can't tell you on that one. But it would be something I'd be interested in investigating too. I looked into a few different, I tried Google Lens and that wasn't as good. Google Keep seemed to function best for me. So I'd be willing to give it a shot.
Hey, any other questions? I did have a question. So you mentioned other languages. Have you tried it with any indigenous languages, native, like
We don't
North
have a
American?
large collection of indigenous materials, but I would be interested to see it. I've tried it on Russian, I've tried it on Japanese, and I've tried it on Spanish so far. And it was pretty good with all of those. Like I was genuinely impressed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, it looks like there aren't any more questions. Thank you for your wonderful presentation,
So much.
and we'll take a break now. Short break until our next session, um, which is going to be at at 4 o'clock. Thank you.